Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is helping us celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. He's the author of Eyewitness Hurricane, My Story of Resilience. His name is Salvador Gomex Colon. Hey, Salvador, how are you?
Very well, Jed. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Well, I'm wonderful, but I'm also heartbroken because the book, your novel, Eyewitness Hurricane, is talking about a moment in history that is heartbreaking for me. The hurricanes that devastated the beautiful island of Puerto Rico, where I have family and so many memories and friends, and so just let me just feel the heartbreak right from the start. Tell us about Eyewitness Hurricane, please.
Of course. So Eyewitness Hurricane, My Story of Resilience is a book that covers my experiences with Hurricane Maria and my founding of my humanitarian mission, Light and Hope for Puerto Rico, which started as an initiative to raise $100,000 to purchase and distribute 1,000 solar lamps and hand-crank washing machines to distribute to a single town, the town of Loíza, which is a coastal town.
Mm-hmm.
And Light and Hope actually ended up raising nearly $200,000, distributing it to over 3,500 households across 17 towns of Puerto Rico. So it's an initiative that went far beyond my expectations and is really a tale of, you know, what is the power of resilience and empathy, and what that can have for others.
For those of you who aren't familiar, Loíza is a beautiful town on the coast, not so far from San Juan, and the road driving from San Juan to Loíza is absolutely spectacular, and the road is at least the last time I was there are these little, I think they used to call it the Fritora tour, where there were all these beautiful kiosks that
Near
showed
Piñones,
yes, Piñones. Oh, what a beautiful, it's a delicious and beautiful tour.
It's great to hear you did that, Jed.
Oh, many, many times. Remind us, because it wasn't that long ago, but because there's so much going on in our lives, we tend to have short memories. Tell us a little bit about the devastation that the hurricane brought to Puerto Rico.
Of course. So Hurricane Maria struck the island on September 20th of 2017. Nearly 2 weeks prior, we had Hurricane Irma nearly miss us in Puerto Rico. I mean, it hit a few municipalities on the East Coast, but it luckily strayed away. But that wasn't after having devastated the Virgin Islands and the Lesser Antilles. So Hurricane Maria was the strongest hurricane we'd seen in decades, and it was fluctuating between a Category 4 and a Category 5 storm around the time that it hit Puerto Rico. So that means, you know, I think high 100-mile-per-hour winds and 200-mile-per-hour gusts. So forces of inconceivable nature. And after the hurricane, the entire island of Puerto Rico went into a blackout. So we had no electricity. 80% of people were without power. It wrought billions of dollars in damage in terms of both damage to individual households, to government infrastructure. I mean, our roads were devastated. Our, like I said, electric and water infrastructure was devastated. Schools were closed. Gas stations were in chaos, and we didn't have enough gas. Supermarkets were those that were open, that could open because they had generators. The food had gone bad. They weren't getting enough food to supply customers. It was a humanitarian crisis that Puerto Rico could never see.
Mm-hmm. And if I'm right, the hurricane, when it hit Puerto Rico, unlike behaviors of many hurricanes where it hits and it goes through, it seemed to stall over the island. Am I right about that?
It did, yes. So hurricanes, when they hit land, they slow down. But often they, like you said, Jed, they take unnatural turns. So they switch trajectories, which is similar to what Hurricane Irma did on September 9th. It hit the coast and then it veered north or northwest. Hurricane Maria came in through the southeastern coast and just rode the entire center of the island, from coast to coast and wreaking, devastation across the entire island.
Mm-hmm. Now, you personally, where were you when the hurricane hit, and how did it affect you and your family?
So I was in my apartment in San Juan with my mom and my two maternal grandparents. We had to evacuate them from their building. They lived in a 15th story, and their building told them to evacuate because I think it was up to like the 8th floor. They really couldn't assure anyone that building wouldn't be shaking uncontrollably and would be extremely dangerous. So we brought them over to our apartment, and we were in our apartment the days leading up to the hurricane. I remember it was the day before the hurricane. We had my school all of a sudden, I think it was a Monday, I believe, or a Tuesday. We went in around 10 a.m. They sent an email saying, because of the hurricane, we're doing a half day, everyone's leaving. And bear in mind, Hurricane Maria was a hurricane that caught us very honestly by surprise. Mm-hmm. Radars really didn't indicate the strength of this hurricane and the trajectory until 48 hours prior to its landfall. So the school says immediately, you're going back home. People have to prepare. So I went back home that night. We went to the supermarket. Supermarkets were already full. Lines went around buildings. It was already chaos, and the hurricane had not even struck. We picked up our grandparents the next day, and we spent that day just waiting and waiting and waiting. And I remember around 9 p.m., the winds were already starting to blow, and the hurricane was still pretty far off from the island. But you could already hear our shutters shaking and slamming against the walls. You could hear the howls of the wind outside. You could hear the changes in air pressure in the house. You would hear the doors shaking. And at that point, we already knew, even early on, that this was going to be a hurricane of epic proportions, that we had, unlike we'd ever seen. So I miraculously, or I guess because despite all the noise and all that, I fall asleep around 11:30 in our living room. We were all in our living room because we were afraid that if air pressure changes, we would get stuck in our rooms. So all of us were sleeping in the couch. And I wake up around 2 a.m. And I sort of not seeing well, and I step on the floor, and up to my ankles, my feet are covered in water. And then I look up and I see my grandmother and my grandfather and my mom basically throwing our sheets, our pillows, anything, towels, anything they could find to stop the water from coming in. It was basically pouring in from our AC vent. And we have a rug, and the rug was already all wet and like I said, water up to our ankles. So I wake up, I go to my room, we start taking clothes from my closet, just anything we could find that could soak up water and just stopping it from coming in. Those attempts proved futile. And a few minutes later, the building started shaking even more. And basically you had our lamp was shaking, and we felt the vibrations. The winds were stronger, and we said, we have to go downstairs. We have to leave here because this is definitely extremely scary, but also dangerous. I mean, the building was shaking very strongly. So we go down, we get to our gym, and while we're there, we basically almost 20 other people in our building are down there. And, this was our safe haven. It was at our building's gym, which is not a very big room. 20 people fit very, very tightly. And while we were there, we were watching through the window. We watched palm trees flying over. We watched the wind literally move a car. And we had a TV connected for the first few hours. And after, I remember clearly the moment we were watching the news channel, and all of a sudden the TV went dark. And that's when we knew that we were in the dark. I tried to call my dad. I couldn't reach him. Tried to call my friends. I couldn't reach them. And this was around 5 a.m. And that's when we knew we are alone. Mm-hmm. And it was an ultimately very, very scary experience, because we at least in my household, and I've always had very much respect for nature, respect for the ocean, respect for, our flora, our fauna. our natural environment. But a lot of times we forget that natural disasters are something else you have to fear because they are much beyond our control. And when you have something as powerful and as formidable as Hurricane Maria coming into the island, it's nerve-wracking.
To say the least. I've been through hurricanes here in Boston. I've been on the island and experienced a hurricane there. I'm imagining that with you must have been terrified for yourself, for your parents, for your grandparents, in that tiny little room with no way of communicating with the outside world.
Certainly. It was an isolation and a vulnerability that I had never really felt before in my life. And I must admit that for the first few days after then, I was feeling a lot of confusion. I was feeling a lot of vulnerability, a lot of anxiety, and I was unsure of how I was going to respond because it's an experience I'd never had. It was an experience that something I'd never had, but at the same time, it was something that the entire island had in common. Because no matter, your privilege, no matter where you were from, no matter your circumstances, everyone was impacted by Hurricane Maria. Mm-hmm. Everyone's life was changed in some way after it.
Yeah. And when we're talking about the power going out, it wasn't going out for, a few hours or a few days. For a lot of people, it was out for months, right?
Yes. The power was 100% island blackout. It wasn't until a few, maybe 2 months after that we first got power. But the last household to gain power after Hurricane Maria was nearly a year after, nearly 365 days after Hurricane Maria, which in today's world, when we depend so much on electricity, both to power our devices, both to light up our rooms, it's sort of hard to conceive more than a few hours mm-hmm. without power. Sometimes I guess that's obviously something we don't experience, but when you get snowstorms, sometimes the power goes out for a few hours, and even then people get scared and people worry. Imagine that times 365 mm-hmm. for nearly a whole year.
Yeah.
It's devastating.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Now, in the midst of that devastation and that fear and that confusion and that feeling of isolation, and I know, that the island, itself felt isolated. Here it is, part of the United States. People of Puerto Rico are all citizens of the United States, and they felt alone. And it was, days before any kind of aid was able to get to them. In the midst of that, you're a young person. How did you find I'm not quite sure what the word is, but, you took action. Where did you find the energy and the confidence and the courage to take action and not just allow yourself to be victimized?
Well, I think in my household, we've always had this understanding that it's sort of a rule that there's always someone having a worse time than you. Mm. And it's I guess a way of recognizing that all of us are privileged in some way. And after the hurricane, despite how vulnerable I felt, despite how honestly terrified I felt, I knew that my circumstances were still better than many other people on the island. My family was safe. We still had a roof over our heads. We had a relatively adequate supply of food. We had medications both for me and for my grandfather, who has many medical conditions. So recognizing that, I remember one time I was looking at the window and it was the haze was starting to clear because after the hurricane, the whole, it was very hazy both because of debris and Sahara dust and whatnot. And to me, that sun setting was hope leaving, and not only hope for me, but for everyone else on the island. And I thought, I feel lonely, I feel scared, but I still have my family around me. How can other people be feeling if they don't have their roofs, if they lost family members, if they lost their belongings? And sort of that understanding drove me to say to myself and to my family, I'm committing, I have to take action. I have to do something with the privilege that I have in the moment. And that's what drove me to act.
Yeah. And I'm curious, why Louisa?
Well, Loisa, my mission initially started with getting solar lamps and hand crank washing machines to Loisa, because Loisa was actually one of the very few towns that was hit by both Hurricane Maria and Irma. But Loisa also is a town that has historically faced extremely high poverty rates, and it's also the site of an interesting history with the United States and sort of medical experimentation. Is actually a location where a lot of women were forcibly sterilized in the early U.S. Puerto Rico history. So it's definitely a town that has a very disturbing and painful history, both in the past, but also with both hurricanes.
I had no idea about that part of Loisa's history. I've been to Loisa many times, and I do know that there's a lot of poverty there. What was the response of the people in Loisa?
Loisa, I remember when we first arrived, we had coordinated with community leaders, because one of the things that I always think about a lot when doing any sort of humanitarian mission, I think this applies to any sort of service we want to any community engagement we want to do, is that we can't do anything without collaborating with the communities we wish to impact. So sometimes if you just go in with supplies, with help of any form, and just go in and say, oh, here's help, that's sometimes more detrimental than actually coordinating, because you want to make sure that you meet communities' needs, but that you also maximize your impact. So we communicated with community leaders in the town, and we'd already assembled a group of volunteers on our end. We arrived to Loisa, to this basketball court from where we were going to start our walkthrough. And I was expecting to see the community leader with whom we engaged and a few other people. There was like 20 people from the town who were waiting for us and saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. We want to help as well. And already 20 people who wanted to help us, walk door to door and give solar lamps and the passion I saw for their community, the gratitude that was palpable, was one of the first moments I felt during that distribution that I had to take help beyond Loisa, because I saw the gratitude they felt. I saw the passion they felt, and I was like, wow, like communities are in desperate need. Why limit myself to just Loisa?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm curious how you were able to get the solar lamps down to the island, because I know here with our family, we went out and bought some solar lamps, and it was really difficult for us to find someone to ship the lamps to our family down in Puerto Rico.
It was certainly an odyssey to get supplies to Puerto Rico. It was very, very hard. But it all started with the first thing was having to place the orders for lamps, and to do that we had to begin raising money, and raising money was a challenge in and of itself, because the contacts that I had, that my family had, were mostly in Puerto Rico. But everyone in Puerto Rico, like I said, were facing their own challenges. So we really had to look for donors outside of the island, in the mainland or even beyond. I mean, we ended up having donations from all across the world, but our main, donor demographic was outside the island. So once we had enough money to make our first purchase, which was a few weeks after, I remember calling the company and saying, hi, my name is Salvador Gomex Colon. I'd like to order X units of this lamp. And the first thing the person on the phone told me is, excuse me, are you a minor? And I was like, yes. And bear in mind, I was trying to disguise my voice, so I was talking very deeply
yes.
and whatnot, to try to hide that. I was unsuccessful, evidently. And they're like, can we speak to an adult? So I had to give the phone to my mom, and she had to, spot me for a few times, because unfortunately I was a minor, so they didn't take me seriously. But once we got the orders in, we got them in the ports, but they were stuck for weeks because FEMA was customs was running the port to ensure that essential humanitarian supplies were getting into the island, but there was a backlog. They were understaffed. They were obviously facing issues with the electricity, and we had those for weeks. And we actually finally reached out to a friend of my mom who has a warehouse at the airport, and she helped us get the containers in like 6 weeks after. So it was definitely a lot of communication, a lot of calls, a lot of meetings. We were finally able to get it done.
Wow. Now, I mentioned at the top of the show that you're a young person. How old were you when this was happening and you were raising this money and bringing this relief to the people of Loíza and beyond?
I had just turned 15.
Congratulations, my friend. Your family must be incredibly proud of you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so we're talking, that was 2017, so you're maybe 19 now?
Yes, I'll be 19 in a few weeks.
Wow. So when are you going to solve the rest of the problems in the world? Because I know that's going to happen next. If you're doing this at 15, I mean, what are you going to be doing at 25?
Well, I guess, Jed, it takes a lot of patience. So ever since Light and Hope, I've continued my humanitarian work, both in Puerto Rico and even the Bahamas after Hurricane Dorian. I've been able to engage with many stakeholders and in many public speaking engagements and take my mission and vision beyond. So I was able to speak at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland in early January as one of the inaugural 10 teenage changemakers of the World Economic Forum. I obviously have Eyewitness Hurricane coming out, which is one of my most exciting projects right now. I think that getting this story to young people is vital because I think it serves two purposes. One, which is a more specific one, it shows, like I said, that all of us are able to help in some way, and all of us are privileged in any circumstance. We have some sort of privilege, so we should always be using that to support others. But in a more specific sense, I guess, it serves the purpose of making sure that our younger generation, even younger than I am, is properly informed about climate change, which is going to be the preeminent challenge of our generation and of our time. We're seeing even, every day we see things are getting worse. We see wildfires continuing to spread. We see hurricanes getting more intense. And I think that young people around the world need to understand that climate change is just more than statistics. It's just more than facts. It's more than wild acres burned by wildfires. It's more than parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. It's about stories and people whose lives are forever impacted and changed in a negative way by all these phenomena. So I think that getting this story out here, and out to the world, Hurricane, is crucial. So I'm very, very excited about what that serves. And I guess in the future, going forward, I really hope to continue following my mission of building a more sustainable, cohesive, and inclusive future where young people, are empowered and able to foster change. So I'm not sure exactly how that may be. I'm starting college right now in the fall, which should be exciting. But we'll see where my journey takes me.
Yeah. I'm imagining that beyond just talking about the devastation, because we really encourage the parents that are listening to this show to read, not only go out and buy a book like Eyewitness Hurricane, but sit down and read it with their kids, co-read it with their kids, and then talk about it. And I'm thinking that this is definitely a book that there's a lot to talk about, but beyond just, talking about the devastation and how you would feel, how can a parent use the experience of reading your book to inspire their kids to go out and make changes in their own communities?
That's a great question, Jen. It's a lot of thinking I have to make. But honestly, I guess it's more, not a lot of thinking. I guess it's more, how can a parent use this? I think the most important part, I think, about solving the challenges that we face today and will face in the future is ensuring that we harness empathy. And I don't think empathy can directly be taught, but I think empathy can be inspired. And I read the study a few years back that apparently kids who read the Harry Potter series when they were younger exhibit greater levels of empathy in the future. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's something that's very subjective. It's not I don't know exactly how they quantified that, but I think that shares the power of stories and the power that stories can have in inspiring others and making sure that the context of the world that people have is adequate. Because I think especially when you have stories that are first-person narratives, that are stories from people who have lived through experiences. There's nothing more effective at making sure that people understand what is going on than those. So I guess Hurricane, in this case, in this specific case, Hurricane, My Story of Resilience, doesn't only tell my story, but it tells the story of thousands of other people on the island who, despite the challenges they were facing, were able to rise up and support each other. I think the title is My Story of Resilience, and I guess it's my name on the book, but it's the story of everyone else on the island who exhibited, unparalleled levels of courage and empathy and dedication to their communities that I think it's a great way to honor everyone who really rose up after the hurricane. So I hope that's inspiring enough. I hope that is able to give parents an adequate enough reason to buy the book and really read it with their kids. Like Jed said, like you said, Jed, there's so many issues you can talk about with this book, whether it be climate change, whether it be, Puerto Rico's relationship with the United States, whether it's young people taking action, you name it. There's a lot there.
Yeah. And as we know, after the hurricane, there's been a number of other natural disasters that have hit the island. It's a beautiful place. What's the one thing that the people listening to this could do to help support Puerto Rico today?
I think the most important thing people can do today to support Puerto Rico is be aware. Know that we exist. Know that we are here. I remember after Hurricane Maria, there was a survey that came out in 2017, or that was published, I think, by a major news organization in the United States, in the mainland. It said that I think around 30%, only 30% of mainland U.S. people knew that Puerto Rico was a territory of the United States. That's appalling. Mm-hmm. That's super disappointing. And the fact that Puerto Rico's history and just the Puerto Rico itself is not taught enough in the United States is scary, because we are American citizens. Yep. We are here. And I think the challenges that we faced with stride, but we still face them. And the challenges we will continue to face don't seem to be getting, any better. So I think that the most important thing that parents and people can do is just understand that Puerto Rico exists, know that we are here, educate yourself, know what is going on. Because to be very honest, when we are ignorant and when we are unaware is when we have disasters happen. So just that's a deeper thought and a more saddening one, but I hope that that's able to move people to really inform themselves and understand the need to recognize that Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans are very much here.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm so happy that you are here, and I am so happy that it is part of the United States. It is a beautiful, beautiful island. The people are beautiful. I fell in love with my beautiful wife, and shortly thereafter I fell in love with Puerto Rico. Salvador, tell everybody where they can go to find out more about you and your foundation and about Eyewitness Hurricane, My Story of Resilience.
Of course. So you can go to my website, salvadorgomezcolon.com, to read more about me and the book and my projects. You can also follow me on Twitter at @sgomezcolon. I'll promise to be a bit more active. I'm not so active, but I'll definitely be, especially now as the book comes out, I'll be rolling out more information, more interesting things on there. And yeah.
Awesome. We've had a really, I said at the beginning of the podcast that this was going to be heartbreaking. And a lot of our conversation was, but I am also finding a lot of hope in listening to you, listening to what you're doing, and understanding that there are many, many more talented 15 and 19-year-olds out there, and we are going to create a better, more empathetic and loving world. And so thank you very much for being on the show, and thank you very much for being part of that better future.
Of course. Thank you so much, Jed. I'm honored to be here, and I'm very, very excited.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Jesse Miller. Jesse Miller is the driving force behind Epic Outreach. It's an animal Rescue Sanctuary in Jacksonville, Florida. They are doing incredible things in writing beautiful children's books that document what they're doing and bring some great education to kids all around the world. So check that out. It's a really, really fun episode. A Protecting the Planet with Your Kids episode of the show. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Salvador Gomex Colon. I'm incredibly impressed by this young man. I want to thank him for all he did for all of my beautiful family and friends down in the beautiful island of Puerto Rico. And I am thinking we're going to see some amazing things coming from this young man. Be sure to check out his book, Eyewitness Hurricane, My Story of Resilience. Also want to thank my team, Alana Doherty, Fatima Khan, my great interns, Rory Grady, Michael Murphy. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to join together to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.